This is the Jedburgh podcast. I'm the host, Fran Racioppi. Each episode, I speak with transformative leaders, visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning, no matter the challenge. The Jedburgh podcast is founded in the lineage of the Special Operations Jedburgh teams of the past and is sponsored by the Talent War Group. A percentage of all proceeds is dedicated to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. Introspection, self-reflection, and accepting when we have failed are some of the most difficult parts of being a leader. Sometimes we're not proud of the way we've handled things in life, but if we acknowledge and own them, the lessons learned from failure can sit right beside the lessons learned from success. In this episode, journalist Cleo Stiller challenged me to not only be a better man, but a better human by getting comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. We spoke about the impact of the Me Too movement on the communication between men and women, the growth mindset that comes from learning about the man box, and leaders' roles in creating equitable, safe, and healthy organizations. Cleo Stiller is an award-winning journalist, speaker, and television host, and most recently, the author of Modern Manhood, conversations about the complicated world of being a good man today, where she unlocks what it means to be a good man in a Me Too era. Harvard University's Nieman Foundation for Journalism named her work as a 2021 trend to watch. Cleo won a Gracie Award in 2015 and has been nominated for Peabody, Emmy, and Synopsis Awards, recognizing her achievements in journalism. Her health-focused television show for Univision's cable network Fusion is the network's highest-performing original series. Cleo has been featured in Fortune magazine, Rolling Stone, ABC News, The Independent, PBS, The New York Times, Variety, Bustle, Essence, and many more. She speaks regularly around the country about her work and social impact. In 2020, she was a judge for the Emmy Awards in the category of news and documentary. And just last month, Modern Manhood was optioned to Gunpowder and Sky for video content production. Cleo, welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So I'm excited to have you here today for so many reasons, and we're going to talk about your career, we're going to talk about journalism, we're going to talk about the book. But I got to lay out that this, for me, is a very interesting episode because these topics are difficult to talk about. They really are about the uncomfortable things that make you think about your behavior, your personality, your approach. But they're critical to leadership and they're critical to how we conduct ourselves every day. And whether that's at the workplace, at home, it really doesn't matter. And I tell leaders all the time that they have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, that every situation they face is not going to be easy, that the answer will not always be clearly defined, and that the skills that are needed to succeed will not always be something we're good at, and they may not even be skills that we possess, but yet we must still have the conversation and we still have to act. And you've built a career on getting people to confront and discuss these uncomfortable topics, what you've called and what we call the gray areas, the equality between men and women, relationships, money, sex, workplace divides, self-health. So I've been excited for this episode because your book, it forced me to think about my actions. And I found areas in every chapter that resonated with me, made me think about the past, made me think about the present, made me think about the future. And yes, it was uncomfortable. At times I was putting it down saying, have I done that? I don't even know. Maybe I did. I hope I did. I don't even remember if I did any of these things. And so I'll prove it to you in this kind of vignette here that I have shared the first 20 episodes of guests with a whole multitude of people who are coming on the show, people who've been on the show, people who I tell about the show. And I kind of go down the list and I explain, oh, this is who this person is. This is what they've done. And all the time, the feedback is, oh my God, that's amazing. That's so great. I can't believe you got them. Then I tell your story and I tell your background, and I tell the topic. And then I get, oh, interesting, or no response at all. And that's when I realize I need to double down on this. That's what tells me that you're a visionary, you're a transformative leader, you're a driver of change, you're a modern day Jedburgh, because you are forcing even these people that I'm giving a quick synopsis of what you're talking about to be uncomfortable without even really explaining it. And so we're going to bring leadership and organizational design into the conversation around love, health, relationships, all the things that you talk about. It's great to have you here. I'm so excited. If you're ready, I am.
Oh yeah, let's dive in.
So I want to start, because I really do think your story starts back in the beginning growing up. You grew up in small upstate New York town. You're what you called yourself as an early bloomer. your parents were very open about the lives of adults and growing up, and they didn't shelter you. So what was it about growing up in that environment where when you were not insulated from adult conversations that shaped your mindset about handling and having difficult conversations?
That's such a great question. And my mother, due to COVID, is actually here right with me. So she'll love this, I'm sure. But yeah, I think I have a really unique upbringing. My parents are both artists and very creative people and very free with many things. But I grew up in a conservative town. So there's a point, right, when you're young and you think that the way you're growing up is how everyone is growing up. And then the harsh reality sets in that in some ways you are inevitably very different than other folks. And I learned very early on that in many ways my parents are very different. They were really interested in arts and creativity, and that is not so popular in upstate New York. But to the point about work, also that intimacy, vulnerability, private lives. My parents, like, I didn't have a sibling to grow up with, so I was always hanging out with adults. So I heard adult conversations at a very young age, and I didn't realize that that wasn't normal. But of course, I was young, so I had a lot of questions. So I'd ask a lot of questions, and they would answer me. Adults, I mean, I'm sure that they would temper for an age-appropriate answer. But so I grew up thinking that you could ask people questions about everything, which obviously would help me in my career as a journalist, but not just what do you think about the weather or sports or who's your favorite team, but really intimate subjects, which is what interests me. So early on, I was asking people about their relationships, their belief on politics, their relationship to their money. And that's kind of the through line on the reporting I've done throughout my entire career.
But then you go on to college and school, and you don't study journalism at first. You study anthropology and cultural studies, and then later on you made this leap to journalism. And because journalism is a tough road. I mean, I have to tell you, I think we've spoken before. I studied journalism as an undergrad, and I ran to the Army, and I spent 13 years in the Army. Somewhat, because you look at that road and you say, oh, I have to go to Bangor, Maine and do 5 other jobs in order to figure this out. And so that's a tough road. But you study anthropology and cultural studies. And then right after that, you actually go to Bloomberg as a production assistant and then later an associate producer. But now that's a far cry from 2 things. One, it's a far cry from anthropology and cultural studies, but then it's also a far cry from what you eventually started reporting on. So can you talk a little bit about Bloomberg, why you went there, the experience there?
So I worked at the investment firm for 4 years. And then about 3.5 years into it, my boss, one of the general partners, took me aside and was like, listen, you're smart. So if you want to do this, you can totally do it. But it's going to be like putting your head through a brick wall. Because I was just sitting there, with quarterly reports and Excel. And he was like, but you're really good with people. So I think you should probably get a job that you're actually good at, which is brutally painful advice when you're in your early 20s. But it was excellent advice. It's probably one of the most important pieces of guidance I've gotten from a mentor. So I had to think really carefully, okay, if I'm not going to be Zoe Cruz and take over Wall Street, what am I going to do? And I loved news. I loved asking people questions and having a license to do that. And Bloomberg was a great step into journalism, but it was financial journalism. And they liked me because I had a finance background.
See, and just like I told you about how I ran away initially from journalism, I also worked in the finance industry when I was in business school. I worked at Merrill Lynch and Bank of America, and I also ran from that.
You ran towards the Army?
Well, from the financial world, no, I ran to run security programs.
Oh, okay.
And
yeah.
Because that's a difficult road too. And so you spent some time at Bloomberg, and then you're working in kind of the production side of journalism with respect to financial services. But then you go to Univision, and you join the Alicia Menendez Tonight show. What brought you to Univision, and what was the goal in making that transition?
That's a great question. So at Bloomberg, I was kind of their Spitfire producer. In some ways, Bloomberg is very traditional, but you always need a couple young bucks reporting stories that normally wouldn't get told. And so for me, my command at Bloomberg, once they realized like I don't fit in this little box, right? I don't want to just talk to like the Caterpillar CEO at quarterly, return time. So my mandate was you can tell any story you want as long as you follow the money. So we told stories about the bull run in Spain. We went to Burning Man, told stories about that, right? Because they have an interesting economy concept. So that's how I was getting stories on Bloomberg, right? And then eventually having to follow the money for every story was a little bit limiting for me.
You probably had to stretch at times.
It was a little, Burning Man's a great example. And listen, at this point, Burning Man has like been there, done that. But back in 2012, Rover Norquest hadn't gone to Burning Man yet. And tech was just starting to go. And I told folks at Bloomberg, I'm like, this is going to be big. I'm telling you, like our finance guys are going to rush to this. So we were we were the first financial network to cover Burning Man. But yeah, then eventually it got a little tedious. And a mentor of mine from Bloomberg went over to Univision to launch this new network. It was a brainchild of Disney and Univision partnering together. And she said, I know you studied women's health and anthropology and cultural studies. Like, would you want to come over and do more human interest stories? You'll have to move to Miami for a year.
Oh, that's so tough.
Damn, I know. So I just thought, all right, let's do it. That was a great opportunity for me because I was able to excel, rise in my career very quickly there. And that's how I got my own show.
And so let's talk about that show. So the show was called Sex Right Now. You kind of put the concept together for that. And I want to get from you how you pitched it, because I think that's a really important part of this story, because when we're creating things, there's so many people have so many ideas. I mean, I have 1,000 ideas a day, and you have to pick which ones you want to execute on them. And then from there, you have to even figure out the ones that you can execute on. And so you have this idea. So how did you actually sell that into the powers that be and the decision makers there at the network to say, this is something that's valuable. I can do this. Believe in me, have confidence. Give me the green light.
That's a great question. I can say, honestly, it's a mix of being very observant and then also extremely tenacious. And so I didn't just start, getting a television show right out of the gate. I started by covering stories that I knew no one was talking about, but on a news level, but that everyone was talking about around the country. And the beauty of this is so if you rewind to 2014, which is not so long, it's 7 years ago, but the way our culture has shifted in this country, it's dog years. So just to remind your listeners, in 2014, President Obama was in office. The Supreme Court had just legalized same-sex marriage. And Tinder, which was founded in 2011, had just started to hit beyond the small coastal bubbles. So young people were popping off. It was just a crazy time culturally. And what was happening was the intersection of shifting cultural attitudes, right? Somewhat more socially liberal generation, certainly more liberal administration, and then technological shifts, completely shifting how we could meet each other, right? And connect. And I told the heads of the network, everybody is talking about this. Everyone is like, is this normal? Do you guys do this, right? Right, because the internet is around us. So people are flooding to the internet and they're going to YouTube to be like, is this normal? What is happening? And there was so much misinformation out there. I said, if we can be the ones that are scientifically, factually accurate without spinning this, I always say, no stigma, no judgment, right? Here are the facts. I trust you, the viewer, to interpret this, to use this to your best advantage, right? I never tell people what to do. I just tell them what's going on. So I said, if we can capture this market, we'll be the first to do it and it'll be a big deal. And so we started off as a digital video series that was massively popular. And then they were able to get sponsorship for that. And once you can make money on media, you can really do anything. So that became the television show, Sex Right Now, which I'll tell you, I came up with that title and my dad was like, whoa, wait a minute, what? I thought you were into international politics. Like, what happened there?
You made a shift. I changed.
But that show was nominated for a Peabody Award, which is the highest honor in journalism.
So I want to ask you about that because the Peabody Award that you were nominated for was in public service journalism. And I find the public service part of that to be really interesting because did you view this as educational?
Oh, hugely, hugely. That's the thing. There are other people who had similar shows to mine after mine, of course. Mine was first. But, they're up at 1 a.m. going to crazy things. I'm a little bit more of a square when it comes to my beat in general. I viewed our program not as entertainment, but as health-focused, scientifically based journalism. And that's clearly came across in the product. It's why the Peabodys paid attention to us. It was a team of very serious journalists. The EP on that had come over from NBC, health journalism. This was really an attempt, which is really what all my reporting is, to say, this is a really exciting time right now. There's a lot changing and a lot shifting, but we really want to give people the information so that they can be healthy and safe and go live their best lives.
I watched some of these episodes in preparation for this conversation today, and I do have to say, there's nothing held back in these conversations. These conversations are literally, you read some of the titles and you say, wow, there's actually a story about that. I didn't even think people spoke about those things to each other. So I can really understand that. So the series does tremendously well. And we fast forward a little bit of time and we get into the Me Too movement. It launches, first here in the US, it gains a lot of global steam. And you start to have this call to action from men who are asking you if you're going to address the issues that are being spoken about. And this was a tough time for both men and women, and in so many ways, a real awakening. Can you talk about what were these men saying to you and what were they asking you to cover?
Yeah, absolutely. So the television show was split about 60-40, 60% male viewership, 40% female. So, roughly half and half, right? And it was fascinating that as Me Too was popping off, right, and in the year that followed, people who were reaching out to me, viewer-wise, were men. Because I think that I had developed this trust with men on the show, that a show about relationships and health and intimacy, but it was like a safe space for them. And I think that they trusted me and my opinion to come to me and ask, are you going to do something about this? Because also the show features, people from all over the country and people wanted to be heard on it. So I heard from guys reaching out saying, listen, what the hell is going on? I feel like everything I was taught to do is now considered creepy or worse. Like I have a lot to say, but I'm afraid to say anything because I don't want to get in trouble. And then they would inevitably dive into a situation in their life that was bringing them stress. And this would run the gamut from single guys being like, okay, whoa, I have been off the market for a while and I just got back on and I am terrified to approach women. I don't even know what's okay anymore. Or I had bosses, right? Obviously coming from Bloomberg, I have a lot of finance and corporate sources. And they were like, listen, I don't want to cop to this on the record. But when this first thing happened, I was totally in favor. Yeah, get Harvey Weinstein in power. But now it's gone too far. And I'm telling you, there's going to be a backlash on this because I know I am not hiring any new female staff. And these are people at SVP levels. Like they have teams of hundreds reporting into them. I'm not hiring any female staff. It's not worth the risk. And I sure as hell am not going to mentor my current female staff. I had one person even tell me, like, my wife told me I'm not allowed to be in a room with a woman who's under 45. So that's on the corporate side, right? And then I had parents writing into me being like, we've been trying for years to conceive. We're finally expecting our first kid. And we just found out it's a boy. I'm freaking out because I don't even know what it means to raise a good son anymore. And I'm worried about sending him to school. Can they hug? Can they not hug? Like, what is happening?
So the call to action now becomes like, I've got to answer these questions. I need to address this. So you come up with a concept, you're going to write Modern Manhood, and it's conversations about the complicated world of being a good man today. And we've got to define this. We're going to get there. But you focus the book on 8 core topics, some of which you just addressed here. And it's dating, sex, work, money, parenting, friends, self-health, porn is one chapter, and then media. So why these topics, and what was important about how you broke those down and the research that had to go into identifying kind of each one of those subsets?
Yeah. So I just feel like the elephant in the room is also like, why is a woman writing a book called Modern Manhood? And the reason I wrote this book, as I said, is because these questions were pouring into my DMs and my email. And so when Simon & Schuster, was just my publisher, came to me about doing a book for them, they were like, we want to sign with you, pitch us some ideas. And this was the last one I pitched because I just felt like this is going to be such a mammoth, like live wire topic. Like I'm going to get it coming and going. Like men are going to think I'm out to get them. Women are going to think I'm apologizing for men. But in some ways, it was the easiest one that I pitched because this is a crowdsourced book. I didn't come up with any of the topics. I only, very methodically, because I'm a nerd, streamlined all of my DMs into like one massive Excel doc and just started, I coded each question topic. And then it just became like, okay, what do people actually care about? And these topics, and then the specific questions within the topic is what, I think the benchmark was like at least 14 people had to have asked a specific question for it to even be considered getting into the book.
And so the book is not necessarily a how-to guide or a clear-cut roadmap to navigating these topics. It's clear about the spectrum of right and wrong, that sexual assault, rape, the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, that's wrong. And there's nobody really can sit there and argue that some alternative or contra argument to that, right?
Yeah.
But it also addresses things like the bad date, the blacked out drunk comments, the actions that you don't remember that sit in this area of, was it illegal? No. Was I a jerk? Yeah, probably. Do I remember it? I don't even know. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. And so it forces you to think about these actions, past, present, future. And the core concept of the book is to push for introspection, to think about the times that you were wrong, that you were really bad to somebody, that somebody walked away from their interaction with you saying, wow, that's just not a good person to me, and maybe at all, or maybe in that moment. And introspection is really important to me, and it's a core tenet of the Jedburgh podcast. It's one of our core topics that we talk about because it's critical to define leadership and to achieving elite performance. You have to be able as a leader to look internally, assess performance, honestly assess that performance and say, I wasn't good enough today for whatever the reason is, and then own that and then make changes to do better. But that's hard. And that's especially hard for men. That's especially hard for type A men who are constantly pushing for that next victory. But that's also something that I've had to accept over the last year and a half of my life. And that's why this book really resonated and hit home with me, because while prior to reading this book and then driving home a lot of the things that I didn't know that I knew as I read it, I realized that there was a period of time where I was a horrible man, a horrible father, a husband, partner, everything in my personal life. And I would describe that as my entire 30s was filled with this wild ride of selfishness and extremes where at times it bled into my professional life. It caused extreme chaos in my life that, I've spent years and years to not only unpack, come to grips with, and then even attempt to recover from. But I also knew that deep down I was a good person. And I knew that if I thought about the conversations I had with myself and my family when I was in my 20s, I knew that that was a good person. So this last year I turned 40. That's why I have to wear my glasses now, because that made a big change. But as I closed on 40, I started to make the commitment that I needed to be better. I needed to be the good person that I was in my 20s. Did I have a lot of great experiences in my 30s? Yes. Did I grow a lot? Yes. But I needed to take those lessons learned, good and bad. I needed to own them. But now being more mature and more experienced, I now had to set a higher ceiling for my own personal accountability and my own personal responsibility. But that started with the introspection and understanding that, hey, I sucked. Like, that was it. Just own it, right? And I don't even know, I can't even sit here and think about all the ways in which I sucked. There's a million on my mind every day, and there's a million that I don't even know I did. But I have to own that. And then I got to make a commitment to changing that moving forward. And there's a quote in the book from Jason in the parenting chapter that I want to read, and then I want to turn it over to you. But it's that modern manhood means you're keeping up with the times and not letting your past mistakes define you. It's standing up for what you believe in and being willing to defend it. It's realizing that there are people who depend on you and not making selfish paths in life that might be destructive or otherwise reckless. Can you talk about the concept of introspection, how the book forces the reader to look inwards, evaluate their behavior and actions, and why positioning the book in that manner versus a how-to guide full of judgment and stigma was not the way to position the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm a journalist, right? Like my big gift is that people really trust me to tell their stories. And why they trust me is because I'm not a talking head, right? And one thing I really learned with reporting this book is that men do not like being told what to do, which works out well for me because I don't like telling people what to do. I don't believe in that. But what I did see and hear while I was reporting this was that men genuinely were caught off guard by this movement. They were like walking around thinking everything was fine, thinking their past was fine. I mean, as long as they're not actively hurting anyone, what could be going wrong? And so when all of these stories started to come out and all of this backlash happened, they felt like, wait, what the hell? Like, I didn't know this was happening. Also, what is my part in this? And more to the point, what are the new rules? What can I do? Like, just tell me how I can fix this or be better. I care, but what do I do? And so I saw this need, right? Because I know, having reported on women's health for a decade, that men consider women's health women's stories. They don't really care, right? But now with what's happening, men do actively want to see at the table on this conversation. They really care about how our next generation is going to come up. And they certainly care, that they don't get dinged for something they've done in their past. And I didn't want to miss this opportunity for all of us to kind of come together and look at our past and look at our future and look at why we do the things we do and not up-level some of our behavior. So the book is based on nearly 100 interviews I did with men across the country, ranging from ages of 18 to 62, from rural North Carolina paper mill worker, South Central LA kid, right? And like everything in between. And also ridiculous amount of research and science, then give the reader the ability, because like, again, if you're just kind of thinking like, I don't know what the hell is going on, but I'm interested and I kind of would like to be better, this is the book for you, because you'll read it and you'll start thinking about your past and you'll be like, oh, that's really interesting. But I'm not telling you what to do. It's just, I trust you, the reader, to decide, okay, this is how I'm going to use this information. I might have like a more thoughtful conversation with my partner at home. I might raise my son a little differently, but that's totally up to you. It's certainly not up to me.
And that's a big part of education. I mean, in education, and especially in higher education, I mean, what's the concept? It's that you teach people how to think, not what to think.
Yes, exactly. And I will just say, because I'm making an assumption about the folks who listen to your podcast, but type A's typically set the stage for everyone else, right? And so I truly believe that for women and men to have better experiences in this world, we need type A's to take this on and embrace this. And so I think type A's are very comfortable pushing themselves in so many ways, but not when it comes to these more intimate, deep, quiet, personal, sexual, relational conversations. And I just think it's such a huge growth opportunity. And we need you, right? We need you in this.
Well, introspection, is like the hardest thing to do for those type of people, because you easily brush it off and you say, whatever, I'll figure it out next time. But very rarely do you take a step back and stop in your tracks and say, okay, why am I in this situation? Why did I get here? Okay, how do I fix it? And your research showed that men have a much more difficult time of opening up and discussing their feelings, as you mentioned, both with others and themselves. And some of the stats that you've presented are 60% of depressed men seek therapy versus 72% of depressed women. Men die by suicide at 3.5 times the rate of women. women cry 5.3 times per month on average compared to 1.3 times per month for men. Unless you were even growing up in a place where crying was unacceptable. If you were a man, then you may actually be, in the zero. But all of these are expressions of emotion. These are the release of often bottled up emotions that have been pent up over time. And the way that you have to get rid of them is through this. But can you talk about this preconceived notion of the men or man as this hunter, gatherer, provider, protector, aggressor, absent of emotion, this persona, and then how it affects that communication with women and men?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I didn't know this going into the book, but as I started talking to people, I realized that all of these classic archetypes we have for masculinity, man is protector, man is provider, man is the lone wolf, man is the leader, right? These are so ingrained in us. In many ways, in modern society, we don't have the same space for them. And so it's extremely confusing. And that's where a lot of the modern manhood gray area questions started coming up. And so I'm sure many people, man is protector, man is provider, man is leader. This is so noble, right? There's like so much about that aspect of masculinity that is fantastic and wonderful. However, there's some drawbacks. And I'll just give a specific piece of research that to me was the most shocking. And I think women and men don't know this about themselves. So it's very interesting to learn. But when little girls and little boys are on the playground, they actually form friendships in the same exact way. So they're all hugging their friends, they're kissing their friends, they're whispering in their friend's ear and telling their friends all their secrets. But then at that playground age, little boys start getting pulled aside by their older siblings, by their teachers, by their friends, their parents. No, don't kiss your friend like that. That is like a girl thing. Don't hug your friend like that. Good God. Like, you don't whisper to your friend. Girls do that. You hit the field. And of course, there's nothing wrong with sports. It's amazing. But if you only are pushed in one direction and you're told not to express yourself in these other natural ways, obviously you become imbalanced, right? So there is a researcher named Niobe Way who's been studying male adolescents for 30 years. She's got this great social experiment she does where she pulls boys aside as they're moving from 8th grade to 9th grade. And she asks them, who's your best friend? And they can always say who their best friend is immediately, right? It's Johnny. And she's like, okay, great. What do you guys talk about? And they'll say, oh, I like everything. And she's like, what do you mean? Like, girls, school, parents, like whatever is going on at home. She's like, well, I do know that your parents are getting divorced. Does Johnny know that? And he's like, yeah, we talk about it. Okay. So she pulls these same boys aside, sophomore, junior, senior year. And inevitably, by the time they get to senior year, that one best friend has now loosened into a group of guys. And she'll say, okay, great. Well, what do you guys talk about? And I was like, like girls, cars. She's like, I know your aunt passed away of breast cancer this year. Did you tell your friends that? And we're like, no, I don't talk about that. That's like, no, way too heavy. And so this gets compounded, right, over the years. And there's a joke in my family that dad has no friends. Mom has tons of friends and dad has the dog. And then it turns out it's not just my family, right? This is actually very pervasive. And what we know about the human cognition process is that verbalization is a critical part of that process. So if you don't talk about your emotions, you actually can forget you have them, which sounds absurd until I describe this scenario. Have you ever been in a fight with your wife and she looks at you dead in the eye and she just says, just tell me what you're feeling?
Yeah, about once a day.
Yeah. Okay. To women, to any women listening to this podcast, this is so familiar because women have said this over and over again, right? And it feels like such a simple question. Just fucking tell me what you're feeling. And guys who are listening to this, I know that you know what I'm talking about. Your partner, it feels like she's up in your face and you just feel like a deer caught in headlights. You don't know what the hell you're feeling. And you just want to walk away, right? This is it's so critical for a difference. And obviously men and women are all different, right? But just generally, women are socialized to talk about their feelings with their friends. So it's very easy for women to access the whole range of human emotion, except for one, anger. And that one is the one emotion that we allow men. So men can't cry because that looks, I never use this word, but kind of, you know what I'm thinking. But, and also, oh my God, God forbid a man giggle. Women can do those things. But what men can do, they can get pissed to angry to mad to furious, right? And that's all very masculine.
Quickly, too.
Quickly. Oh, and you can go from 0 to 10. And in fact, we kind of reward that. I mean, I came from finance to breaking news, and the people who were on top were people who could go from 0 to 10 and you would just scream, you know, if like a trade went wrong or the story didn't break right, that's okay. That's like an acceptable expression of emotion for men. So back to land this on your question, but I think it's really helpful for people to understand that when it comes to communication, we are coming from extremely different playing fields. And it's not that it's natural per se, it's socialized. And I think it's really helpful for people to understand that, because what I heard from men the most is that men feel pissed. They're frustrated. They feel like they're not seen, they're not heard, they're not appreciated. Like the weight of the world is on their shoulders and no one cares.
And a lot of these things that you've talked about here with relation to men, you've kind of put in what you call the man box.
Yeah.
And so the man box houses all of these kind of stigmas of what a man is supposed to be and what they're supposed to do. So can you kind of explain the man box for me, but then how do we break out? How do we get men to accept, I don't have to be in this box. There is no box. I mean, this is important because this concept of a box is something that is really big in leadership, something we talk about all the time, that people will say, oh, well, he thinks outside the box, she thinks outside the box. But really, coming from special operations, there is no box. And the minute that you start thinking there is a box is actually when you've actually put yourself or the thought process inside of that. So how do we get out?
Yeah. Okay. So I will say, to me, the man box was not revolutionary, like the concept wasn't, but it's been so interesting to me because in having published the book, one of the concepts that men tend to respond to the most is the man box.
It's because there's a graphic of it. You can look at it and you're like, what's the man box? And conceptually, I'm like, oh man, that seems like really out there. And then you look at it and you go, oh yeah, wait, there's literally a list of things in a box. And now I see it and I say, oh, that's the man box.
Okay. You know what? Then it is like the one picture in the book.
It is the one.
So the concept of the man box was originally developed in the 70s by a men's group based in Oakland, but has since been updated for our generation by a guy named Tony Porter. And Tony Porter is kind of an OG who works, does like men's work, but the groups he works with are legit. Like he is embedded with his contracts with the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, all the ones that matters, right? Because as we've been saying, people look to type A, so they particularly look to athletes to set the tone for what masculinity is. And so Tony works with these athletes on masculinity, right? With the hope of having a trickle down effect. So for the guys he works with, and I'm sure the guys listening to your podcast, like this is for you. Okay, here is the box. And these are qualities of being a man that you must embody. If you do not embody them, you get dinged over and over again by society. So let me know if this sounds like you. Do not cry openly or express emotions, with the exception of anger. Do not express weakness or fear. Demonstrate power and control, aggression and dominance. Be a protector. Do not be, quote, like a woman. Be heterosexual. Do not be, quote, like a gay man. Be tough, athletic, have strength and courage. You make decisions. You do not need help.
In my 30s, yes. Straight down the line. Absolutely.
Wait, so yeah, you don't think you have some of this now?
Well, I don't think that you can completely shed it. I don't think you wake up one day and you say, oh, I'm no longer in the box. None of these things apply. No, I don't think so. But I think now there's an understanding, right? Now that you start to understand, okay, where do I fall? Probably each one of these things has a certain spectrum, right? And so now you can start to score myself, right, on that spectrum. All right, where do I sit with relation to each one of these points? And where do I need to be that makes me feel good about myself and then make others feel good about me in how I present myself to them, right? And then are we working together to make our relationship better if I understand that I'm going to fall on the spectrum of some of these things? And so that knowing, I think, helps you to become a better person.
And so here's the thing, like, not all of them are bad, right? Like, being a protector is a wonderful quality. Where we have the opportunity to think about that a little bit with current society, right? Because now that we're not cave people running around being chased by woolly mammoth, what does it mean to be a protector? And is that only something that a man can do? And so one of the things we talk about in modern manhood is, like, if you take the concept of being a protector or provider for your family, usually we link that inextricably with being able to provide financially for your family and being able to physically protect your family from violence. When it comes to money, one thing that we know is, and this comes up in the book, right? I heard from guys, one thing that we know is that women will increasingly out-earn their male partners, right? Women are pursuing more advanced degrees, and that's particularly true in urban areas. And so what I was hearing from guys was like, it's really confusing because I feel like I'm kind of progressive in most ways, but my wife makes 100,000 more than me, or like 50,000 more than me. And it really bothers me. And they were self-sabotaging their relationships in other ways because this core issue was really a problem for them. And it was even surprising to them that the amount of money they made had such an impact on their worth as men. And I'm just using this as an example because you can use this formula to think about other things in your life. But this idea of being a provider for your family is actually like a very noble concept, right? And we should not throw that out. But the truth is, both women and men have the instinct to provide for their family. And that we've associated male providership with money, isn't naturally ingrained in us. Like when we were Neanderthals, men hunted, but that was like a luxury good, right? I'll use modern terms. That's a luxury good. So meat only came around once a week. Women provided as well. They provided the daily fare of nuts and fruits and berries. And so dual income households is actually the way that women or men are wired to interact. So if you're listening to this and you're in a situation where quarantine or COVID has perhaps caused you to lose your job and you feel really depressed and like you're not a man in the role of your family or your income, maybe you still have your job, but some of the projects you thought were going to come through didn't come through because how many industries are tanking. When I asked women about this, right, it turns out that there are so many other ways you can provide within your relationship besides money. And so if you're having that impulse, like you just feel like less of a man because you're not bringing that home, there are actually so many other ways to provide. And that can be picking up stuff around the house, helping your partner with childcare, family care, lawn care, all of this stuff, right? And it requires us to communicate in ways that we haven't done it before.
Which makes everyone better.
It makes everyone better. And sometimes just asking your partner, like, listen, this is fucking hard for me. This is how I'm used to being. And I know this is temporary. But what can I do in the meantime? Because I need to feel like I'm providing for this family. And that sort of introspection, that sort of vulnerability and communication can really change your relationship in incredible ways. And it's a way that you keep a quality of the man box, but you've completely revolutionized it because you made it work for your life right now. So you're living outside the man box. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And so you're moving to a part of that spectrum somewhere in there that makes you more contributing to the overall good, I would say, of the home.
Right. Rather than being locked in. Like the point of the man box is that all of these qualities, if they're not allowing you to live the best life that you can, and I mean like some of them obvious, like if you haven't cried in 5 years, you're not living your best life.
Or you haven't challenged yourself enough, is what I would say.
And I interviewed so many men and I asked them when was the last time they cried, and they didn't even know. I mean, like when a pet died when they were a kid, right? That has an impact on you, right?
Well, so let's talk about that for a second a little bit more, because part of that shield that goes up comes from this separation that you talked about as an adolescent, where you're open with your feelings, you're open with your friends, and then you kind of devolve as you get older and you separate away from the close, intimate relationships to this more circular type of friendship. That then devolves into this, what you call locker room talk, where your conversations with your friends as a male are about women, they're about work, they're superficial. There's this bragging that goes on about, how much money you have, how many women you've been seeing, something like that. So how do you define this locker room talk? Talk a little bit about that. But now I got to challenge you on that, because when I read this, and I took a note in the book when I read it, and I think about the show Sex and the City, which was a great show showing that women have these conversations very much in the same way that men do. And here, in the book, you talk a lot about how this perspective of men having this is something that has created a challenge to communication in society. But don't men and women both do this? And what's the difference?
So it's a great question, and it's very nuanced, and it's also this is not black and white, right? This is completely a gray area, very contextual, very specific. So the way that we talked about this, for example, was a guy named Jim writes in. First of all, I heard from so many men being like, I have a friend that says like kind of racist, kind of sexist stuff, and we used to let him get away with it, just kind of laugh it off. But with everything going on right now, I don't feel like that's okay. But I don't know how to call out my friend because, I don't want to like create waves. And then also, I don't want him turning around on me and being like, oh, what? Are you perfect? Because we all know we're not. So the question then becomes like, well, why do guys talk like that? Right. And what I heard from guys was like, please do not take away my locker room talk, because that's all we got. Like, I can't roll into the office and tell, like, also, sometimes women have this like work husband, work wife relationship. They're like, I don't have that, right? Like, I can't roll in and just be like, my wife and I haven't like connected in 6 months and I'm frustrated and I just like, I can't meet any of my deadlines. All I've got is like pointing out how the young woman in the office is looking good in the outfit. Like, that's how we're going to bond. Or like the game that was on last night. Like, that's all we've got. So don't take that away from me. Now, do women do that? Absolutely. For sure. And it's not that if that was like only some of your conversation, like inherently, okay, so, this is the story I wanted to tell. I got away. Jim writes in, and Jim was like, okay, I'm a dad. I live kind of a boring dad life. I'm like 42. A lot of my dad friends are very woke, but I've got this one dad friend who's not woke, and he's out there and in a sort of way that used to be very entertaining, but these days makes me very uncomfortable. And so this guy, every time the couples get together, this one guy in the group is always kind of like starting things between the sexes as if there's like this mad gender war happening. Like the husbands have to be on one side of an argument and the wives have to be on another. And this guy makes jokes like he calls his wife my future ex-wife. Again, in ways that Jim said, like, it was kind of refreshing because it's just so bold. But one night, the two couples were out to dinner with their kids. And they're sitting around the table at the restaurant. I think it was Greek. And Jim is sitting next to his friend, and the wives are on the other end of the table, and they're talking to each other. And Jim's friend leans over and kind of nudges him to look below the table. And so Jim does, and his friend is holding a naked photo of a young woman and looking at him like, she's hot, right? And Jim is totally confused because he's like, wait, what the hell is going on? Like, our wives are right across from here. Like, who is this girl? Are you having an affair? Are you telling me, like, what is going on? And so in his mind, like, what do I even do with that, right? So the question is, why is this guy doing this? The theory behind it is that this guy really does would like to connect with Jim, right? They're buddies. They like to hang out. But his default mode is to go into this one way of communicating, which we've sanctioned for men. Like, you can talk about work, you can talk about your commute. I mean, everyone jokes about this, and you can talk about your bygone days. But what if we allowed men to have more emotionally vulnerable conversations so that you weren't defaulting to this all the time? women generally do this, right? It's not saying that you're not going to find 4 women at brunch discussing the size of their hookups from the night before. You will. But they'll also be talking more deeply about how that experience made them feel, how past experiences have made them feel. And so one thing we talk about in the book, some example, someone was like, am I not allowed to talk about the bodies of the people I've been with? And there's it's a gray line, right? Is it just respectful? But it's locker room talk. Like, does it hurt anyone? If she never finds out, does it matter? And so the idea is like, if you only talk about the bodies of the people you hook up with and you're not talking to your friends about how it makes you feel or the experiences make you feel, that is a problem. But if you're doing it also coupled with more deeper conversation, fine. Does that make sense?
It does. And so there's going to be times in these conversations like what you just talked about where you're not going to agree with the comments that are being made. You're not going to agree with the actions made by other men, the things that they talk to you about, the things that they show you. And challenging them on it is hard because you've talked about this concept of, well, if I challenge them on it, are they then going to look at me and say, oh, he's not in the box. That guy's not in the box. He's not a man. He's less of a man. He doesn't agree with me. But there are times when you look at people and you say, well, that guy's just shitty. Like what they said, what they did is just bad. It's just wrong. And so you threw out this concept of call your friend up, not call them out. So what does that mean?
Yeah. So I talked to this guy, Brian Stacy. He does men's work now, but he's formerly applied to work with the FBI and like the classic man's man, 6'4", college athlete, etc. So he said, when he was in college, he hooked up with many women, and with their consent, he would videotape their interactions. Then he would keep them for his personal records, and without their consent, sometimes he would show the videos to his friends. And this became legendary in his friend group. I think they call it like the B files or something. And he had this for years, right? And his feeling was like, well, if we made the video consensually and it's like just a small group of friends that I'm showing, like he wasn't emailing the file, he would just like show them on the phone. Like, what's the harm, right? And so he had the B files for years. Then when Brian had like a come to Jesus moment and was like, I don't really like how I'm living. This is like not authentic. He decided to delete the B files. And his friends were like, what are you doing? Like, we live for your files. And he explained to them, I've just been working a lot on my own ways of like how I'm showing up. And that just felt kind of shitty. And I'm not doing that anymore. And I tell that story as an example because when your friend says something shitty, what they're really probably trying to do is bond with you in a way that has been how you guys have done it forever and is socially acceptable for men. But if you, and I think we all don't want that, right? Like we don't want to be having these same conversations in a decade. You don't want this friend to be talking like this 10 years from now. Instead of calling them out, you can let them know, hey, I know you're telling me this because you just want to like share something with me. Like, I totally get it. All good. Just heads up. I've been thinking a lot about the stuff I've been sharing and how I've been communicating with you guys. I'm not really going to do that anymore. It just makes me feel like I'm like putting women down, which I'm not super down with. And again, you can amend this, right? But just owning it, that it's your kind of journey. And you don't have to get super deep. It doesn't have to be super touchy-feely. Just being like, I totally hear why you're talking with me like this. I've been thinking a lot about it. I'm not going to do that anymore. And do not go on and on about it. It's like one sentence. And then be like, how's it going with Sharon? Like punt the question back to something that is more, honest, more intimate, more reflective. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. You don't have to get on a soapbox about not being, it's not that.
Well, this how is really interesting. I mean, because that's the hardest part is you have to make that transition, right? So leadership is about standing up for what's right? In the military, we call it choosing the hard right over the easy wrong, which in itself is difficult because the hard right by nature is actually uncomfortable. And it's much easier to sit back and say, oh, I'm just not going to do anything. Let it go. I keep my mouth shut. Nobody judges me. And I dealt with this a lot in building security officer programs. We would it's challenging as a security officer to go up to somebody and say, hey, you're not doing this right. You're not doing this. And is it much easier to sit back and say, well, let them go by. Sure, they have a visitor, but that's okay. It's probably their spouse. It's their daughter. We shouldn't interact. But you got to be able to initiate these difficult conversations. And men are often terrible at this, at a higher rate than women are. And so the how of you do that is how you make that leap. And so I think addressing it like you just talked about is one way. And another way you talked about was humor.
And then that's the other thing, right? Because I think what we've learned about how men prefer to communicate is like, they'll just let it go, they'll let it go, they'll let it go, they'll let it go until it's like, then they blow up. And that leaves like no nuanced or like more subtle forms of communication. But humor is such a wonderful way to communicate. And the truth is, everything right now is very awkward and very uncomfortable. And you can totally lead with that and be like, yeah, listen, this is totally awkward, but I'm just going to be upfront. I know this is going to make me sound a little lame, but I'm just not doing that right now. And I feel like we're both better than that, and like make a little joke.
I like that approach.
You like that approach?
I like that approach.
Good. Okay. Listen, it's also a tactic I use to ask really intimate questions. I'll be like, this is awkward, but I got to ask.
So this is interesting. And I want to bring it up here because I do think it's actually a very interesting story that I have, which I wasn't planning on telling, but I might as well because it came up. So this happened to me because I come from a world where you're faced with monumental challenges all the time. And so you have to figure out a way to kind of, in the point in which you learn that there's something extremely difficult that you've now been asked to do, you have to figure out a way to kind of internalize that. And one of the ways in which I, in my personality, internalize that is when somebody presents me with a complicated problem that I may have looked now 5, 10 steps down the road and said, wow, this isn't like as easy as they've just briefed. I'll do what I just did there. I'll kind of smile or laugh because that's my deep breath. That's my, okay, how do I take a step back? It's you kind of assess it and you kind of chuckle a little. Well, this got me in trouble once because I was being briefed on a very complex plan by a younger female in the office, about 10 years younger than me. And they needed my organization's help to pull this off. And they briefed it. And then when they said, what do you think? I had thought about these 30 things that had not been thought about in the presentation to me. And I gave that, to me, nothing. Well, I got a call about an hour after that meeting from my boss. And he said, hey, this just happened, but she believes that you laughed at her because she's a woman.
Yeah.
And I was shocked, absolutely shocked. And I said, well, I don't understand what you mean. First of all, what did I do? Like, I don't even know what I did. And he's like, well, I didn't notice it, but apparently you laughed at her when she presented. And I said, in no way did I laugh at her. I just got briefed at absolutely ridiculously complex operation and told that I needed to execute it in a very short amount of time. And that's how I internalized it. And so I actually did go and have the direct conversation and apologize, said I didn't mean if I offended you in any way, this is how I internalize things. But to me, that was a big wake-up call because I had no idea.
Yeah. Okay. This is a great example of what I hear from guys all the time, which is just like, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Like I'm just being me. And then I'm getting called and told, oh, I've laughed at a junior female employee. That was disrespectful. That was not my intent at all. First of all, I completely hear you on that because I also use humor as a defense mechanism. It's okay that you fucked up like that. It's okay. And I don't even know if we would say it was an F up, but if you hurt someone's feelings, I'm sure like you don't want to do that. So let's say, yeah, you screwed up.
You have to look at it like that.
Yeah. So that's fine. Like this is going to happen. That's part of the point of the book is like, you are going to mess up on this road to being like a good modern man. You are going to mess up. The thing to do is exactly what you did, which is call and apologize and say, listen, in my head about it, I apologize. And what your takeaway from that can be, and I hope is that things that you would be oblivious to previously, you have to be a little bit more mindful now. You just do. And hopefully, if we're all more mindful about this over the next 15 years, then it will dissipate. But it is true optically that to have a more senior man laugh after a junior female has presented, it's just not good optics, right? And we know because there are decades of women not being taken seriously. So it might not have been your intent, but it's how it looked.
And that was a tough one because I actually thought the project was pretty cool.
And then all you have to do is just call and you have that conversation. And I'm sure that they're like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. And then you move on. It's not the end of the world.
No, absolutely. So this actually takes us to kind of what I wanted to do is a little bit of a lightning round. And we've talked about a bunch of these concepts, but they're kind of the stigmas, right? They're the few, 5 or 6 difficult conversations. And like I said, we talked about a couple of them, but I'm going to throw out the phrase, the sentence, the couple of words. And then I want you to just very quickly come back to me with the first thing that comes to your mind. This is the how-to. I know we said we didn't create a how-to, but there's got to be a little bit of a how-to, or at least how to think, right? It's maybe not how to do, but how to think. And so we'll run through this. I'm going to stay quiet, which is very difficult for me to do, but I'm going to throw them out. And then you give me the first thing that comes to your mind, which is like the how-to. Okay. First one. Male leaders are avoiding one-to-one meetings with female employees because just an allegation will ruin their career.
If you behave properly, statistically speaking, you do not have to worry.
Okay, 2. Men must script every word that comes out of their mouth and censor every action.
Absolutely not. Just think before you speak.
Okay, 3. Chivalry is dead. Being a gentleman is no longer a thing.
Absolutely not true. Being a good person is always in fashion. Anything that you would extend to a woman in the note of chivalry, extend it to everyone, and then your bases are covered.
Okay, 4. There's nothing wrong with a stay-at-home dad.
If you like being a stay-at-home dad, be a stay-at-home dad.
I would love to be a stay-at-home dad. I would love it.
All my yeah, anyway, okay. Yeah.
I tell my wife, I said I wouldn't talk. I tell my wife all the time, like, I would be the busiest stay-at-home dad you ever met.
A type A as a stay-at-home dad is a dream.
Oh, that would be the best. Okay, 5. Financial feminism is the path to independence and equality.
Financial feminism, which is the idea that women need to be financially independent to have a good life, is right for some women.
Okay, last one. Acknowledge harm, repair the harm, transform.
The motto for every person going forward.
Okay, so we've provided a bit of the how-to.
Yes.
Okay, all right, I like it. We talk about talent management a lot here, and we talk about the 9 characteristics of what Special Operations Forces recruits, assesses, and selects for. And it's drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, team ability, effective intelligence, emotional strength, and curiosity. And you have to demonstrate all of those at different times to achieve elite performance. And not all at once. You're going to have different combinations of them, but generally you have to have some component of each one of those things. You have defined how to be good as not being a function of being a man or a woman. And you just referenced it here in the last little bit we did, but being a good human. So what are the characteristics of a good human today?
I think they're largely the characteristics you just listed: compassion, courage, perseverance, resilience, mindfulness, strength. We're not very far off, you and I.
But we got work to do. I mean, we have to change behavior, and changing behavior is not fun, right? To get everybody into those worlds, right? Whether they're your list, my list, yeah, they're fairly complementary. We could do an analysis, lay them side by side and go, a one-to-one comparison. But change of behavior is hard. It takes practice and commitment, and small change every day and incrementally will bring on future change down the road. And then you look back and you go, wow, I can't believe we came so far. But it's especially difficult on leaders of organizations who not only have to consider their own actions every single day, but also have some level of responsibility and accountability for the actions of their teams and their subordinate leaders that work for them. And so you have a quote, which I kind of just put into context, but yours is much better than mine. And that's that micro changes can make massive differences eventually. And when they start happening on a massive scale, that's the change we need. That's where we need to go. So how do we develop this growth mindset every day and commit to it? What do we tell leaders of organizations, leaders of teams to say, you got to keep the growth mindset every day. You got to do these couple of small things, but also we got to be real and rational. And we can't go off the other end and wrap ourselves in bubble wrap, don't speak, unless spoken to, one word answers, and then enter this world where we can't achieve anything because everyone's afraid to look at each other. Almost like when COVID started, right? You didn't even want to look at anyone. If I make eye contact with them, I have COVID.
Yes. Well, I want to first, my first recommendation is that leadership gets really clear on why they're doing this. Because if you're not clear on why you're doing this, then you're going to fall off the second it gets hard, and it's going to get hard immediately. So I think the reason why leadership needs to commit to making the changes that we discuss in Modern Manhood is because you are genuinely and passionately committed to having the world be more equitable and safe and healthy for women and men, right? Because what we've discussed here is that this system when we currently operate in hurts both. If you do not want to have this conversation with your daughter in 15 years, that's a good motivation, right? If you don't want to see your son get dinged for something that you screwed up in your past, that is a very strong commitment. So you have to really be clear on why you're doing this. And it's why I wrote the book and why I talk about this, because it will kill me if in 10 years I'm having these same exact conversations. So first, get really clear on why you're doing it, because every time that things get tough, you are going to wonder why, and you have to get clear on the core. So, okay, first of all, that's why you're doing it, right? Second of all, be comfortable being uncomfortable. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. So we are talking about centuries of behavior that never got up-leveled. And people who like history and science, you're going to love this book because it just teaches you so much about why we are where we are. It's not a mystery, right? But good to know it. So centuries worth of behavior isn't going to be unlearned in a decade, right? So you have to just kind of know that you're strapping in for the long haul and you're going to mess up. And that's okay. So for example, at a leadership level, I've developed the work chapter into a corporate workshop. And what I do with leadership is one idea that we have when you're in leadership is that you can't ask questions of your team because you have to have all the answers. It's a huge mistake, and it's not going to work anymore because your team is going to have a certain perspective about how things could change to help them that you might not know. And you're not expected to know because if it's not your life experience, why would you know, right? So, for example, it's a great idea to pool your team and separately over email, whatever. It doesn't have to be direct talking to them if you're not comfortable doing that. Send them an email and being like, listen, I am really committed to making shifts in the way our team is working. My head is not stuck in the sand. I see conversations happening globally right now, and it's important to me that we show up as the best team possible while also managing productivity and efficiency. So if there is something that you have an idea, shoot me an email and let me know and I'll incorporate it. And people have ideas because this is when I talk to leadership, I'm also talking to the staff that everyone's got an idea of how it would work. And some of this will be using a lens that you have not previously thought of before. So everything is specific to the team, right? But there's a certain way of doing business that we have, and you don't really question it. This is the time to question what the impact of that may be. If you are used to getting together for later at night or dinners or weekends or something, that kind of behavior, while usually really fun, also limits the accessibility for people that are responsible for childcare and home care, which often tends to be your female team members. So I heard from guys, they were like, do not take the happy hours from me. I love grabbing a couple of drinks after work. I'm not saying you can't drink with your team, although maybe you should not. But if you're going to do it from 3 to 5. There's no reason that you can't shave off 2 hours off your workday, right? If you're running an organized team. So that way you're still sending people home at the time that they would need to be responsible for home. And there's a lot of other ways: communication, meeting structure, mentorship. We talk a lot about mentorship. There's a lot of ways that you can tweak how you're interacting with your team that will make massive changes in the success of the women on your team. And again, you're not expected to know everything. So just ask and do that thing that we were talking about where you can be like, it's a little awkward. I grew up in Indiana in a small town. Like, we didn't talk about this, but I'm committed to doing better. So let me know, right? What do you need? And I'll take it into consideration. That kind of leadership is so rare. And I hear from so many people that if they just knew that their senior was seeing them, was hearing them in that way, it would make fundamental difference, right? So that's what I advise. That's kind of the work I do for leadership. We do like role playing and stuff. But then also the one thing I'll end with, because it comes up from all men, is that there's apparently this kind of like urban legend of a woman who will walk around where if you hold the door open for her, she's going to freak out at you. Because I heard from guys all the time, they were like, just things are so crazy right now. Like, I don't even know if I'm supposed to hold a door open for a woman because she's going to like lose it on me. So the question is, do you want to hold the door open for the woman coming up behind you? I hope you say yes, right? But the question is like, why? A lot of people, when I ask, they'll be like, I don't know, like, it just seems like the right thing to do. It's how I was raised. It's chivalrous. It's noble, blah, blah, blah. These are all great qualities. We're not trying to lose that, right? But the updated version of that is if you're going to hold the door open for the woman coming up behind you, hold the door open for anyone coming up behind you, right? That is what a good person does. And so once that's just a really simple behavior, right? But what makes us feel defensive about it is that we don't know why we do it. So like, we're like, is this right? Is it wrong? Is it right? Is it wrong? Once you've decided that you are the kind of dude that shows up in the world holding the door open for anyone who comes up behind him because that's what a good person does, then say you run into this urban legend of a woman who yells at you for holding the door. You're not going to be bothered by it because you already know. You can just say, sorry, didn't mean to ruin your day. I hold the door open for everyone. And you walk away and you know through this modern man lens, like you are showing up as a good guy.
And this will be really interesting as the world comes back, right? You know, as the world comes back from this, it's like the things that you haven't even really thought about.
Totally.
For the last bit. So the book's been at the top of the charts since it released over a year ago. You're working on kind of a V2, some updates to it. You're doing some research. I would love if in the new version, I told you I had a recommendation for you, and you just hit on so much of that recommendation is I would love to see a bit about leadership in there and a bit about how organizational leaders tackle these challenges, because we've had a year. I mean, it's not a year off. I mean, but it's a year where a lot of these things you haven't had to think about as much as you have when you're kind of in the workplace every single day.
Yeah.
And so as we get out of the Zoom world, right, this is an interesting time because we're going to be coming back together as societies over the course of the next year. But society has never been more divided on a basis of politics, of race, of gender. So much has also happened in this time, but we've been separated. And now we're coming back together. And so this is a really interesting time over the course of the next year or so where we can all up level and we can all call each other up to do better. And so I got to ask you as we kind of close out here, I always end and I talk about the Jedburghs in World War II, and I talk about the fact that I believe they had to do 3 things every single day to be successful. They had to shoot, they had to move, they had to be able to communicate. If they could do those things as a foundational basis for everything they did, it didn't matter what challenges came their way, they would find a solution to solve them. What are the 3 things that you do every day to win and be successful?
I love this question. I'm very regimented for someone who's so creative. So my 3 things have to happen within the first 30 minutes of waking. Otherwise, the whole day is shot. So I have to journal, have coffee, and movement. I have to exercise. If I mess with that component, it's all shot to hell.
Love it. That's great. Amazing. So I finish these where I take the soft attributes and I assign everybody who I speak with kind of what I think their core soft attribute is. And this was very difficult for me. So the soft attributes: drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, team ability, effective intelligence, emotional strength, and curiosity. And so So you 100% exhibit all of those, or I wouldn't have had you on the show, kind of the prerequisite, right? But I try to narrow it down, and I look at two for you, and I think about curiosity and your life as a journalist, and I talk about integrity, because if I were to sum up, how do you become a good person? How do you define a good person? How do you achieve this social movement and these cultural changes that you're talking about? It comes down to understanding what's right. And to me, that's integrity. And so curiosity is exploring the unknown, questioning the status quo in pursuit of better, this continuous growth attitude. And integrity is defined as understanding what's legal and right and aligning those to your actions and your words. And so I think for you, you're the first guest that I can't decide. So I have to give you curiosity and integrity, because your dedication to the advancement of social justice, cultural transformation, forcing the hard conversations that people don't want to have with each other or with themselves, that truly is transformative leadership. That's the forcing of change. You've said it's complicated, it's uncomfortable, it won't happen overnight. There are no shortcuts. I couldn't agree with any of that any more than I do. And I want to just close with two quotes from the book that I believe I take away, and I'm going to think about these every day. And the first one is that you have to choose courage over comfort. So all of us need to allow for vulnerability and imperfection. And the second one is, when internal personal desire becomes greater than the resistance or risk that's outside, that's where change happens. And so I thank you so much for coming on the Jedburgh podcast with me. I thank you for driving this conversation forward. I thank you for making me uncomfortable, but becoming more comfortable with it. And I hope that everybody will take a little bit away from this conversation and get better today, a little bit better today than they were yesterday. American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh podcast. I'm your host, Fran Racioppi. We're brought to you by the Talent War Group, an executive search firm and talent advisory. We'll drive you to attract, retain, and develop top talent. With services like leadership development, talent acquisition, and keynote speeches, we work with you and your teams to create talent solutions to business problems. To get started, visit talentwargroup.com. Join us next week for a new episode of the Jedburgh podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran Racioppi, and the Talent War Group on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and send your comments and inquiries to info@thetalentwar.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh podcast and the Talent War Group contribute a percentage of all profits to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, supporting the families of our fallen warriors. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.